Let's go ahead and read chapter 1, verse 1. So we have Vayehi deber Adonai el Jonah ben Amittai lemor. So we have Vayehi. We know that this is sort of a special, literally, and it was. But often at the beginning of a narrative, it functions something like, and it came to pass, or even once upon a time, although that's a little bit more fairy tale-ish. But you could say, and it came to pass. That's sort of the literary King James way of saying it. And so, and it was, deber Adonai, and it was the word of the Lord. We might say the word of the Lord came. So, and it was the word of the Lord, el Jonah ben Amittai. And it was the word of the Lord to Jonah, the son of Amittai, lemor, saying, and we might say that instead, and the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying. We'll look at verse 2 now. So it begins here. Kum, lake el Nineveh, ha'ir ha'gedolah, ukara aleha, ki alata ra'atam lifanai. Okay, so we have two imperatives to begin this. We haven't seen either one of these yet. We have kum, up on the top left here. We see kum is a cal imperative masculine singular. The root is kum, and this is a II-Vav yod verb. Sometimes we call this a hollow verb because the R2 letter, being a vav or a yod, sometimes it turns into a vowel, and so rather than kavam, which you might see in certain stems, particularly the intensive stems, in the cal it just turns into a vowel. You get kum, and in some cases, for instance down here at the beginning of verse 3, you see that the middle vowel drops out altogether and you just have kam. And so this is our 3ms. We'll see that when we get to verse 3. On a side note, let's take a look briefly at how we talk about verbs that have a vav or a yod in the R2 position. We just looked at the cal imperative masculine singular of kum, and we report that with the three radicals, kof, vav, mem. This is a II-Vav yod verb. Normally, when we report a root, we just take it from the cal perfect third masculine singular. So we have, let's say, pakad. That's the cal perfect 3ms. So we would just write pakad as the root. For verbs that have a vav or yod in the R2, we can't do that because the cal perfect third masculine singular drops out the middle letter. So the dictionary form, rather than being the cal perfect third masculine singular, ends up being the cal infinitive construct. The cal infinitive construct is here kum. And here we see the vav shows back up again. When we write the root, oftentimes we drop the vowel points out, and so we just see kof, vav, mem. I find it convenient, though, to put the vowel point back in many times because it just reminds us how to pronounce it. As another example, the verb seem, the cal perfect third masculine singular is sam, and so you see that yod is dropped out. Even though the root has a yod, we can't see it in the cal perfect third masculine singular. The cal infinitive construct, however, shows it up as seem. When we write the root, we just put it as sin, yod, mem, and oftentimes it's helpful to put the vowel point in just for pronunciation. Later in verse 3, we're going to see the infinitive construct lavo, and we report that as cal infinitive construct plus lamed prefix, and the root we give it is bo, and or we could just put the vowel point in there to help out our pronunciation. The Cal perfect third masculine singular is ba, and that doesn't help us because it doesn't tell us what the middle root letter is. In this case, a vav. So we need the infinitive construct to let us know what the middle letter is, whether it's a vav or a yod or a, in this case, kum, a vav. So that's how II-Vav yod verbs are handled. Returning to Jonah chapter 1, verse 2, kum is a masculine singular imperative of the root kum, which means arise. And then we have lech. Lech, interestingly, comes from our root halach. Also is a Cal imperative masculine singular. This looks a lot like a one guttural. It just has a guttural in the R1 position, but it acts like a verb with a yod or a vav in the R1 position. So that first letter drops off. We will see one yod verbs later. So we've now looked at a II-Vav yod verb and a verb that acts like a one yod or a one vav verb. Even though we haven't covered these yet, it's useful to see these ahead of time because then when we do come across them, they won't seem quite so shocking to us. One of the advantages of reading through a book like this is we're going to be exposed to many things that we haven't covered yet, so we'll get some familiarity with them. Then when we do cover them, we will have some experience with them. So kum, arise. Lech, go. El, Nineveh. Of course, that's Nineveh. You can sound that one out. Nineveh. And then we have Ha'ir Hagadolah. And so we just put those together as an adjective and a noun. The city, the great, or the great city. So Nineveh, the great city. So the beginning here, arise or rise up. Go to Nineveh, the great city. Going on from there, Kara. Here we have another imperative. In this case, we have a guttural at the end of it, and so we have an A-class vowel here. In this case, because the aleph forms an open syllable, this vowel lengthens. This is simply an imperative. Just looks a little bit different. It's a 3-aleph verb. It still has the vocal schwa that you'd expect for a Cal imperative. So it's a Cal imperative, masculine singular, which makes sense because God is still talking to Jonah. And cry, call, aleha. Al is upon, concerning. It can also mean against. In this case, we're looking at against her, her meaning the city. So the 3fs pronominal suffix here, against her, or concerning her, refers back to the great city. The city here, Nineveh. Call against her, or cry out against her. Ki alata, that. Alata, this is a, put it up here, this is the verb Allah, and this is what we call a 3-hey, or sometimes it's called a 3-yod verb, because in some cases that hey ends up converting back to what probably was originally a yod. In any case, the 3fs is kind of a funny form because it puts a tav in there between the lamed and the hey. So we get alata. This is just your 3fs, just a Cal perfect 3fs. Alata, that, and Allah, of course, we learned that a long time ago, is just to go up or to come up. That alata ra'atam, and so here we have ra'a, a feminine noun, and of course when a feminine noun puts a pronominal suffix on it, it swaps out that final hey for a tav, so we have ra'atam, ra'a evil, ra'atam their evil, for their evil has come up or gone up, lifanai, before me. This is lifnei and then a pronominal suffix. The pronominal suffix is first common singular. So let's read through that. Kum, lech, arise, go. El Nineveh, to Nineveh, Ha'ir Hagadolah, the great city. Ukara aleha, and cry out against it. Ki alata ra'atam lifanai, that their evil has come up before me. Okay, that's verse 2. Let's read verse 3. Vayakam Yonah livroach Tarshisha milifnei Adonai vayered Yafo vayimtsa aniyah ba'a Tarshish vayatain sikara vayered ba lavo imahem Tarshisha milifnei Adonai. Okay, the beginning of verse 3 is Vayakam. Notice the accent here tells us that the first syllable is accented. Vayakam. This is a cal imperfect vav consecutive, and the root again is kum. I mentioned before that a hollow verb or a II-Vav yod verb will sometimes lose its second root letter, and that's what happens here. Vayakam. It's just a 3ms. The vav consecutive, you got the vav plus the doubled first letter, tells you it's an imperfect in any case. So we have vayakam, vav consecutive imperfect, and he, here's Jonah over the beginning of the next line. So, and Jonah arose, so God told him to arise and go. Jonah arose, but he didn't go where God told him to. Vayakam Yonah livroach, a classic infinitive construct. We have the vocal schwa, the holem theme vowel, that matches our cal infinitive construct. The lamed is really kind of a giveaway here. Barach is to flee. Notice the little furtive patach here because we have a guttural. Livroach, but you don't really need to pay attention to that for parsing. And so we have, and Jonah arose to flee Tarshisha. Here is our zakef katon, that is our accent and also a minor pause. Notice that the circle, I mentioned before that this little circle has no value in terms of pause or accent. It tells us about a note over on the side. So Tarshisha, notice when we have a hey at the end of a word but it's not accented, we may be looking at a directional hey. Textbook calls it an accusative hey. Of course, Tarshish is the name of the city. Tarshisha is to Tarshish, to flee to Tarshish. Milifnei Adonai. And here's our atnach telling us that we are at the end of really a sentence here, perhaps a semicolon, maybe a hard pause in the middle of a sentence, but it's a hard pause. Vayakam Yonah, Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish, milifnei, from before, possibly away from, and some translations might even say from the presence of, and that would be an interpretation, but it would be a valid translation. Away from the Lord. Now this next verb here, vayered, notice the accent. This is telling us that the accent's on the first syllable here. Vayered. This is a cal imperfect vav consecutive of yarad, and it is like halak, but yarad is a true one yod verb. And as we'll see later, sometimes when we put a yod prefix in front of a one yod verb, a yod ends up being dropped, and so we get vayered. So we have yarad, to go down, or to go down to. So we have vayered Yafo, to Joppa. And he went down to Joppa, which is on the coast of Israel. Vayimtsa, this is also a vav consecutive imperfect, and it's from matzah, so it's a 3ms, no imperfect ending, yod prefix. And so we have a cal imperfect 3ms of matzah, and he found aniyah, a ship, ba'a. We've learned the vocabulary word ba a long time ago, cal perfect 3ms. The actual root of that is bo. It's one of these hollow verbs, a II-Vav yod verb like we saw at the top for kum. And what we're looking at here is a cal active participle, feminine singular absolute, which matches the ship here. So this is to go, to enter, to come. So he found a ship going. In this case, the participle is being used as a verb. He found a ship going. The verb can have the idea of entering or going to Tarshish. Vayatain sikara. Vayatain is just natan, and natan is just one of those verbs that is so strange you just have to learn it, and you see it enough that you get used to it. This is natan. The 3ms, you can tell it's a vav consecutive because of the patak and the doubled first letter. And that's a cal imperfect vav consecutive, 3ms. And he gave sikara. Sakar is a payment or a wage. And here we have a 3fs pronominal suffix. And so and he gave its payment, or probably its price, like its fare. And what does the 3fs refer to? Well, back to the ship. He gave its fare, meaning that the ship's fare. Vayered, we just saw that at the beginning of this sentence here. Vayered, and he went down, ba, in it or into it. Lavo, this is the same verb that we saw before, bo. That means, and this is a classic cal infinitive construct because you've got a lamed in front of it, and so bo is your infinitive construct, and so it's lamed plus infinitive construct to do something, in this case to go. So go back to vayered, and he went down into it to go, imahem, with them. This is your preposition im. Mame doubles when you put something on the end of it, and then the pronominal suffix, with them, Tarshisha, to Tarshish. We saw that earlier. Milifnei Adonai, away from, or from before, or translation would be from the presence of, perhaps, would work, away from the Lord. So let's read that entire verse. And Jonah arose to flee to Tarshish, away from the Lord. And he went down to Joppa, and he found a ship going to Tarshish, and he paid its fare, or he gave its fare. We would probably translate that, and he paid its fare. And he gave its fare, and he went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the Lord.